Panalangin kay San Agustin. O San Agustin, pinili ka ng Amang lumikha upang maging guro ng pag-ibig. Ilaw ng mga mangangaral at mag-aaral, pantas ng simbahan, haligi ng Santa Iglesia, tagapagtanggol ng pananampalatayang Kristiyano at kalasag laban sa mga kaaway. Hayaan mong matularan ko ang iyong halimbawa ng pagbabalik loob sa Diyos upang ako rin ay makatamasa ng matuwid na landas tungo sa kaginhawahang walang katapusan upang ang puso ko ay pamahayan ng banal na Santatlo. Ito po ay banggitin natin ang ating kahilingan. Naway maisabuhay ko ang halimbawa mo, o aking patrong San Agustin, upang ang aking napapagal na puso ay makasumpong ng kapayapaan at magalak sa pag-ibig ng iisang Diyos. Amen. San Agustin, mahal naming patron, ipanalangin mo kami.
Good day, Batingaw. I'm Father Prince Lenric Marcelo, the Parochial Vicar of St. Agustin Parish here at City of Baliwag. And welcome to our Kwentong Debosyon, this Pistang Patron 2023. And we are so fortunate and blessed to have our special guest this day. With no more so much ado, I'd like to introduce, and I'm honored and humbled to introduce to you our special guest, no less than His Excellency Archbishop Charles John Brown, the Apostolic Nuncio to the Philippines. Good afternoon,
Thank
Your
you,
Excellency.
Father. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. It's always wonderful to be in Baliwag.
Thank you very much for responding to our invitation for this program to deepen the spirituality and devotion of our faithful regarding the life and works of our beloved patron, St. Augustine. So, Bishop, for the first question, I'd like to say or ask you, how would you describe your devotion to St. Augustine, and how has this inspired you, and as well as your pastoral ministry?
Well, there's so much to admire about St. Augustine, you know, a wonderful saint in the Catholic Church, probably the most important theologian in the Catholic Church, in the history of our Catholic faith. And there's so many things to choose from, but I think one of the things that really attracts me to the figure of St. Augustine is his absolute fidelity to his pastoral mission. As you probably know, when St. Augustine was elderly, and indeed when he was coming to the end of his life, his city in North Africa, Hippo, was besieged by the Vandals, who were a ferocious tribe that had come in from Europe and crossed into Northern Africa, were besieging his city, and many people fled the city. And St. Augustine would not flee. He would stay with his people to the end. And his fidelity to his people, which is such a great figure for all of us who are bishops, and even priests, or married couples, fidelity to our vocation, fidelity to our call, fidelity to what the Lord asks us to do. Whether it's easy or difficult, with the Lord all things are possible. And I think it was his fidelity to the end in that city besieged, and in fact the city fell to the Vandals after he died. That really inspires me as a bishop to be faithful to what the Lord has asked me to do.
All right. I'm surprised with your answer, Your Excellency, because here in Baliwag, our parishioners have this devotion wherein they carry like a staff which try to emulate the crozier of St. Augustine, and they have that as something of it expresses the protection that is given by the pastor.
Yeah, it's a perfect image of what he did. He stayed with his people. He protected them to the very end. He never left.
Yes, thank you for...
He never ran away.
Yes, and we have that here whenever we bring St. Augustine to different parishes.
In the Diocese of Malolos.
Yes, here we put in like some sort of a packet wherein the people could place their prayer intentions so that we could bring it to St. Augustine here in our parish.
That's great.
It's very, the connection is there.
Yeah.
So the next question, Your Excellency, is that what particular, do you think, principle, teachings, or writings of St. Augustine would help us, our faithful, deepen their relationship with God?
Yeah, again, there's so much in the
know,
writings of St. Augustine, but if I was to choose one thing, I would choose his famous line when he's in the Confessions, speaking about God. He says to God, "You have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they rest in thee." Our hearts are restless until they rest in God. And this is such an important point, because every person has been created by God in the image and likeness of God, and is called to communion with God. But because of our weakness, because of our sin, sometimes we wander around confused, not knowing where to find that beautiful truth that only God can give us. You know, there was that country song in America, maybe in the 1960s or 70s, looking for love in all the wrong places.
Yes.
And you know, we know people do that. They look for love in all the wrong places. Their hearts have been made for God. They have this desire for unity with God, but they don't really understand that desire, and so they begin to search for some kind of satisfaction in all the wrong places. And St. Augustine is telling us there's one place to find satisfaction for your heart, and that is in the heart of God, in the Sacred Heart of Jesus. So for me, that's the most kind of the essence of the teaching of St. Augustine. Our hearts are made for God, and our hearts are restless until they rest in Him.
Yes, looking at the different directions. So connected to that, Your Excellency, St. Augustine turned his back away from those wrong direction.
Yeah.
And in the church, we call that as conversion.
Sure.
So what is the importance of conversion?
St. Augustine had a very dramatic conversion. Yes. And again, there's so much that we could say about it if we had more time for this wonderful interview. Of course, part of the reason for his conversion was due to the prayers of his Holy Mother,
Yes.
St. Monica, who was praying incessantly for the conversion of her son. And the church believes that the tears of St. Monica converted her son Augustine to the Catholic Church and brought him back to the truth of Catholic faith. And he became someone who had been living a very sinful life to someone who became, as I said earlier, probably the most important theologian in the Roman Catholic Church. So this amazing transition, this amazing transformation, it shows us the power of prayer, of St. Augustine's mother, St. Monica, but also shows us the power of God's grace. And we should never think that anyone is beyond God's grace. God's grace can touch the most hardened sinner and turn them into a great saint. That's what St. Augustine shows us. And it gives us hope, right? Because all of us who are weak and have difficulties know that God is all-powerful. God can do all things. When we see people living lives of sin and desperation, which leads to sadness and disillusionment, we need to try to gently bring them to the Lord and allow that grace of God to convert them. Because God's grace is all-powerful. And that's what his conversion shows us.
Yes, that's why I remember, Your Excellency, in the prayer that we recite every Thursday here in the parish, because every Thursday here is our day of devotion to St. Augustine. We have that term there in the prayer, Doctor de la Gracia.
Yeah, Doctor de la Gracia, Doctor Gracia. Yeah.
It only shows the power of grace that works in our lives. So
Absolutely.
it's, as St. Paul would says, it's where sin abounds, grace abounds all the more.
Very well said. Thank you.
We are truly blessed for these wonderful insights that you are giving us, Your Excellency.
Thank you.
So for your final message, Your Excellency, how do you think our faithful here at the parish would further deepen their relationship or their devotion to our patron, St. Augustine?
Of course, here in the wonderful parish of St. Augustine here in Baliwag, you have a great devotional life centered around St. Augustine. And of course, I'm here for the first Mass of the Novena that will culminate in the feast day of St. Augustine. So you have a great devotional life. I think also it's important, I think, to study the life of St. Augustine, to find maybe a biography of St. Augustine that you can read. And someone perhaps who is perhaps studied a little bit more could read the actual autobiography of St. Augustine, which is called the Confessions.
Yes, the Confessions.
And it's not beyond the reach of many people to read the Confessions. But I think that I would encourage people to know the life of St. Augustine. Find a biography of St. Augustine. Maybe have a parish reading group where you read the Confessions together, or read a biography of St. Augustine to really understand his life more and more deeply, because it's such a tribute to the power of God's grace, as you've been saying, Father.
So we'll never deepen our devotion to our patron unless we know him in depth.
Yes.
His life, his work, and how God's grace worked on him.
Absolutely.
So this is a wonderful conversation, Your Excellency, though short but very substantial.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much once again for sparing us your precious time for our faithful here at the parish to deepen their devotion to St. Augustine.
God bless you and happy fiesta.
Happy fiesta, Your Excellency. And this is once again Father Prince Marcelo of St. Augustine Parish. And we would like to thank our beloved Apostolic Nuncio to the Philippines, His Excellency, Archbishop Charles John Brown. Thank you very much once
Thanks,
again.
Father. God bless you. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.